Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. It appears as if voters nationally are consistent only in their desire to throw the bums out. Whether it was Republicans in 2008 or Democrats in 2010, the new Republican emergence in Washington cannot bode well for New York, as the slash and burn party of no gears up to continue to tear down President Obama and return us to what they seem to think were the glory days of the Bush administration. Progressives bemoan that voters are voting against their own economic interest, sending a party that left a legacy of debt, unpopular war, and increasing economic inequality to battle a Democratic administration trying to cope with the wreckage they found when they walked in the door. The voters, in the words of Jay Leno, chose folks who got us in the ditch over the people who have yet to dig us out of the ditch. But anger is not always rational, and voters are more than vessels of economic ideology. New York, which had the lowest turnout of any state in the nation, was not immune to the Republican tide, as more Democratic congressional seats switched parties than in any other state. On a state level, we, of course, went the opposite direction from the country, electing a full Democratic slate of statewide officials led by Governor-Elect Andrew Cuomo. As we tape this program, it's not clear who has control of the state Senate, though it appears the Republicans will emerge with a 32-30 advantage, adding a new measure of gridlock to a Capitol that is all too familiar with inaction in the face of crisis. Outgoing Governor David Paterson, with the support of Governor-elect Cuomo, is pressing to severely cut the state budget as he heads out the door to give Cuomo a head start on tackling a multi-billion-dollar deficit. While some progressive voices call for adding progressivity to our relatively flat state income taxes, we face the prospects of layoffs in city schools, higher tuition in CUNY and SUNY, the closure of firehouses, slashing of child welfare social workers, and other cuts that will eat into the bone of the social compact that supposedly binds the residents to its government. And Cuomo has made clear that taxing our way to a balanced budget is not part of his agenda. It is a grim picture, but giving up is not an option. As Ronald Reagan used to say, if there is a room full of manure, there must be a pony in there somewhere. We are joined by four prominent New Yorkers to try and take stock of where we are and where we might be going. Wayne Barrett is a veteran journalist at the Village Voice. Nicole Gelinas is a contributing editor at the City Journal and senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Ron Daniels is the president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and distinguished lecturer at York College. And Gustavo Rivera is a newly elected state senator from the Bronx. Wayne, let me start with you. You've seen what happened in the elections. Cuomo's coming in, says he's not going to raise taxes. What do you see happening?
Well,
what happened?
He's made it clear, and even Shelley Silver, the Speaker of the Assembly, has made it clear. So it's become the Democratic position, strangely enough, that we will not raise taxes in this state in this climate. I don't think the question really is whether or not we'll raise taxes. The question is whether or not we will maintain the tax hikes that were done in 2009 and 2010. The 2010 tax hikes were much smaller than the income tax surcharge that was imposed in 2009. And to me, the test of Andrew Cuomo is going to be whether or not he extends those surcharges, which start expiring very soon. He's going to face a budget where the very first weeks when he's governor, he's going to have to deal with a $1.5 billion hole that will be created in that budget, plus a $5 billion hole in the next budget if he doesn't extend that surcharge and the income tax surcharge alone. And so I think those are real numbers. If he doesn't extend it, it just adds and compounds the problem in terms of the cuts that you were discussing. And not only that, we have this strange situation in New York, which most New Yorkers don't understand, which is if we go back and do not extend that surcharge, we go back to a system in which everybody who earns more than $40,000 is in the same tax bracket, because what they did in 2009 was add two tax brackets for the rich. I hope they maintain those two tax brackets.
I don't know if you would call that a tax rise or a tax cut if they don't extend the tax hikes that were in fact sunsetted. Should they do it?
No, they should not extend them. So yes, they should let them expire. And this is because it's not only a state problem, it's a city problem as well. you've got these two new tax brackets that push people at the state level paying 10% state taxes. If Cuomo decides not to go after Medicaid special interests, other special interests that make up this spending, he's going to cut local aid to New York City and quite possibly tell Bloomberg, you deal with this problem. And that means people face a city income tax hike as well, potentially. In other words, if the governor decides to keep the state tax surcharge, it could very well go along with a new city tax surcharge. And the mayor knows we've got 5,000 families in the city who are paying 40% of the income taxes. These people are not doing very well right now. They're looking to cut their own expenses. And it may seem absurd to the rest of us. You've got multimillionaires, but they've got options. Many of them have a house in Florida and Arizona already. And they can just think, gee, I'm going to spend 2 months more out there and not pay these New York City, New York State taxes. That's not ideology, that's reality. And the mayor sees these figures every day, how the tax base is getting narrower and narrower. We don't want to continue that by pushing spending up even further, meaning it's not only these tax hikes that we're seeing, but tax hikes 3 years later, 5 years later, and then we're pushing out wealthy taxpayers, and we're not diversifying our economy away from Wall Street is what we should be doing. We're growing more dependent on Wall Street because the Wall Streeters are the only people who are making this income.
Ron, you just wrote an extensive piece analyzing the national elections and essentially arguing that people voted against their economic interest in putting in the Republicans. This tax debate, which is going to take place in Albany, obviously is taking place nationally as well. And as the Bush tax cuts sunset or don't sunset, and you have the rather unusual situation of the president saying, I want to extend them for everybody except for the rich, and the Republicans saying, if you don't extend the tax cuts for the people making over $250,000 a year, we'll let everybody take a tax hike. So, I mean, did people vote against their economic interests?
Well, I think they did, and I think one of the problems is that, and this has been going on for quite some time, frankly, but in the middle of the greatest recession or the greatest crisis since the Great Depression, which Obama inherited, as you correctly stated, you have the GOP, the Grand Obstructionist Party, really setting a trap for Obama, in that what was really required was very bold and visionary leadership. The stimulus package, for example, that he ended up being an albatross around his neck, should have actually been much higher. It should have been at least $1.2 trillion. But what he did was he compromised first. All across the line, he compromised first, as opposed to boldly asserting what the nature of the programs that were needed to pull us out of this crisis. And so now he's in a very, very difficult situation. And I think the Democrats, particularly the liberal progressive wing, or the Democrats in general, have failed to define what it means to be a Democrat anymore. They don't talk about working people anymore. You don't talk about poor people anymore. The middle class. I mean, so it's a real difficult situation. And the Republicans had the upper hand because they were willing to be the obstructionists. They laid the trap. The stimulus did not work as well as it should have. And even those things that worked, the Democrats did not articulate those. They ran away from the successes that actually were achieved.
Senator-elect Rivera, you don't know if you're going up into the majority or minority or a 31-31 split Senate.
Not yet.
I mean, what do you think you're walking into? And one of your first decisions could in fact be on some of these tax issues and how you balance a budget that could include severe cuts to services that are important to a lot of your constituents.
Well, regardless of what happens with these elections, I never lied to myself about Albany. I worked in the state Senate for a few years when we were still in the minority. I was chief of staff for State Senator Andrew Cousins when she got elected in 2007. So I did not think that this was going to be unicorns and rainbows and everything was pretty and beautiful up there. I'm very clear that this is going to be a very tough situation that I'm going to have to deal with, as well as my colleagues. To speak a little bit about the election, it's not done yet. There's three seats that are still undecided. I remembering Andrew Cousins back in 2004, in the first time that she ran, on election night, she was down by 1,600 votes. And there were enough irregularities that we actually we extended the process to make sure that every vote was counted. And when it was stopped in February, in the next year, she lost by 18 votes, and I put that in quotation marks because I do believe that it was stolen from us. There were a few hundred ballots that were still left unopened. So we don't know what that process is going to do, I think we should count every vote. Now, as far as the tough situation that we find ourselves in, I think the first thing that I'm going to have to do, and this is actually very helpful, what I'm doing what's happening right now, is that I need to go to school. I'm very much a progressive. I'm very much a liberal. There's certain things that I believe strongly in as far as the role of government in people's lives and what we should do regarding tax policy or regarding securing services for the people that I work for, who are my constituents. But I'm not going to be closed off to these types of conversations because I have to learn about what the actual tax picture is, what the actual revenue picture is, and make better decisions along with my colleagues as to the best way to address it.
Wayne, how quickly does Cuomo have to move? How quickly will he move? And how quickly do we hit gridlock?
Well, some of it depends on what happens in the Senate. Nicole,
Well, except that the Senate was presumably 32-30 Democratic, at least for part of the time, in the last 2 years, and not a lot got done.
And they passed this progressive tax that I think ought to be extended, which I think is the key issue that we face in the budget crisis. I mean, I certainly agree with Nicole that if you still got to deal with a $7.5 billion deficit or maybe even an $8 billion deficit by extending the tax cuts, you still have that much left to do. You can't say this is a cave-in to the special interests, that you want to maintain a tax cut that's already, a tax hike that's already been out there for a couple years and doesn't appear to have driven too many rich people out of New York. When I'm talking about extending something that was done in 2009, and the rich people are still here. They're not going to leave New York because they got to pay a few $100s or a few $1,000s or maybe even $10,000 in additional taxes. I don't think there's any evidence that they will do that, and they certainly haven't done it since this tax was passed. So, to me, you still have $7.5 to $8 billion worth of cuts that you're going to have to make, and you're talking about the basic two costs of state government or education and health care. So a great amount of that has got to come out of those two entities, and it's going to come out of those two entities, and Andrew's going to have to, I think Andrew's dealing with that on an everyday basis right now, trying to figure out how to analyze where you can cut in Medicaid without hurting the health of people, and there's an awful lot of fat in the Medicaid budget. And I think he's trying to focus in on what are the most practical cuts that can be made that will have the least impact. The irony is that the Republicans in the Senate are going to demand that they still get a completely disproportionate share of education aid for the wealthiest school districts in the state and the suburbs, and he's going to have to deal with that if those guys win the Senate.
One thing that I'd like to actually talk about for a second is that there is, as somebody who's going up there again with eyes wide open as far as what the situation is, our fiscal situation, I still think that we're too quick to talk about cuts. We do have to talk about expenditure cuts. However, I think that we need to first speak, and I think that Wayne started the conversation off well by talking about what the revenue stream is into the budget. And second, although I don't, I actually believe in progressive taxation, I do believe that we should not only extend it, maybe we should create new ones for wealthier New Yorkers. But I think the second thing that we need to do, and I do agree with the governor on this, is that we need to look at ways that we can make authorities and agencies across the state more efficient. I think there's ways that we can look at some of the management structure there, try to have the least impact possible on frontline workers, since those are the ones that always get impacted first. But there's ways that we can actually make that more efficient. After we do those two things, then we can talk about cuts. And I think that they're going to happen. It is the job of people like myself who represent a district that is, in all honesty, a poor district that has a lot of needs, that is served both there's a lot of hospitals in my district, there's a lot of healthcare industry in my district, and a lot of education people that work in the education industry. So I think that there's going to be impact not only in the services that are provided, but also to the work of people that live in my district. So job of people like myself is to make sure that we do not forget that we work for these folks, but at the same time communicate to them that there will be some pain. And it is about doing it in the smartest way possible so that it has the least impact, at least from my, and the way that I look at it, the least impact on the people that sent me up there to make sure that I advocate for them.
Nicole, Governor Patterson, is he doing the governor-elect a favor by trying to make these cuts now?
Yeah, I think he's doing him a favor by trying to get this process started, similar to what Governor Schwarzenegger is doing out on the West Coast, opening up another $25 billion budget deficit out there and saying, let's deal with some of this now. As to the tax hikes, accountants say they've got clients calling them and saying, how can we plan to move our income elsewhere and move our assets elsewhere if these things are not temporary? And the numbers show that they have not raised the amount of money that they were supposed to raise. And this is where a few issues get tangled up. Unfortunately, the bailouts of Wall Street have not helped New York in the long term, because these Wall Street firms, they made record profits last year, $62 billion. They'll make very healthy profits this year, probably more than $20 billion, which certainly not $60 billion, but that would still be one of their top 5 years ever. And so there's this illusion out there that Wall Street is just taking off again, growing, everything is all better, and New York can continue to increase its spending well beyond inflation, year in and year out, and never suffer any pain from this. So that's not a helpful addition to this whole debate, because you've got people on the political side that can say, let's just hold out, things have gotten better so far, maybe they'll just get a little bit better. But in the meanwhile, the people in this industry know that the smarter ones at least know that this is a one-shot thing. This is all because of the Federal Reserve. It's because of these extraordinary bailouts, and they are looking to cut their costs. They don't want to be paying 9, 10, 11% in taxes to New York State alone. And so there will be real moves outside of the state.
Those are comparable to taxes in states around us.
But not in states where you would move as a private money manager. You're not tied to New York. You're managing money for private clients as a retiree, making a lot of investment income. Then in those cases, you move to Arizona, Florida, Nevada, and so forth. And as for progressive income tax, I think that's a fair debate to have. Large-scale tax reform at any level is a fair debate, federal, state, either one. But what should the top rate be? Should it be 10% or should it be 7%, which is where it was before? How much do you ask any one group of people when you're looking at paying possibly 40% tax in federal income tax, a new 3% surcharge for the Medicare bill, so you're up to 43, 4 in New York, so you're up to 47, and then 10 in New York State, so you're up to 57. How much is too high of a progressive income tax? I mean, we're going to have progressivity, but it's a matter of where do you put the top state rate? And so that's a question I would ask you. Where would you like to see the top state income tax rate? And if it goes into the double digits, as it's very close to right now, isn't that a real concern, that people won't see this as a place to invest your money in your life?
I don't have a number, but I wonder whether or not you think we should go back to a system where everybody over $40,000 is in the same bracket. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's a fair discussion to have, but you've got to set the number at the top. I mean, you can bring everyone back. You can say we're going to charge people making under $40,000 a 10% tax, but that's fair somehow because we're going to charge people making above $40,000 a 20% tax. That's very progressive, but that's not very good for the economy.
But that's not what's on the table.
If you say we're gonna lower the top rate to 6%, and then we're going to make it more progressive at the bottom and have negative income tax for more people, that's a fair discussion to have. But to do that, you cannot raise public spending, triple the inflation rate in many years. And you can't have MTA workers, other public workers, making six-figure salaries in salary, pensions, and benefits. So these are discussions. I mean, these are all fair discussions to have, but they do have to do with a firm number. At some, you agree, at 100% income tax rate, everyone's going to leave. Somewhere between 5 and 100, you're losing people. You're losing tax revenue. And so just to kind of mindlessly raising it, as the state has done, and saying, oh, it's in the name of fairness. It's not really in the name of fairness. It's in the name of raising money to close a budget deficit because they have not wanted to deal with the spending issue.
I think at some point we're going to have to, at a philosophical and political level, begin to take on this tax issue. Mm-hmm. It's ancient history, but when I was a kid coming up, I remember the marginal rate being something like 90%.
I think it was 70%.
It was way up there. Let me. You've had a long dissertation here. Let me just finish this. And so we're in a bind now. Today, New York Times. I understand that Ronald Reagan, whom you quoted, actually raised taxes 8, 10, 12 times.
Right.
All right? But now he's the guru, and now we're in this low tax phenomenon. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in America, in the world, recently said, look, you know, I make a tremendous amount of money. I should pay more taxes. The people who are in the middle class and the $30,000, $40,000 should pay less taxes. They're the ones who should get a tax cut. We're in this bind where somehow we feel that taxes can never be raised. And it seems to me that what we need to do, as you're saying, Senator, I mean, is it Senator or Assemblyman?
Senator-elect.
Senator-elect, is to be able to communicate to people what the real needs are. But let's be clear, the people who make the most, who make obscene fortunes in this country, have to pay more. And they can pay more. And I think Warren Buffett is exactly on target. And I think we have to call their bluff. I don't believe, as Warren is, I mean, as Buffett, I mean, Barrett is saying, I want to make you a millionaire.
Yes, that's right.
Right?
I'll take it. I'll take it.
That people are going to flee New York or flee anywhere else. It's become a mantra, and the Democrats have caved to that mantra, including on the question of extending the Bush tax cuts. Imagine the Republicans with a straight face, conservatives, saying we need to extend these tax cuts, even though they want to cut the deficit on the one hand, but when it comes down to these tax cuts, they don't want to. They don't want to offset that with a tax cut. I mean, these tax cuts are going to increase the federal deficit by something like $800 billion. And with a straight face, they'll say, let's extend them. That has to stop somewhere. And the Democrats have got to have the courage, the guts to stand up and to say that.
Yes, we do. I want to add to that. I think this is one of the reasons why during my entire campaign, and certainly now that I'm elected, I'm not going to change my tune in this. I call myself a progressive because I believe, again, there's basic responsibilities that the state and the government has. Now, we can, and it is a valid conversation to have, particularly with folks like yourself that are expert in tax policy. I want to have a realistic picture of what a particular percentage is gonna, what kind of impact it's gonna have on people leaving the state. I think that that's a good conversation to have. But the reason why I believe we need to move in that direction is because the options are very clear. While we're talking about $40,000 and up, or we're talking about $250,000 or what have you, the median income of the people that live in my district is $24,000 a year. I have 72,000 units or more of rent-stabilized apartments. I have one of the worst overcrowding problems in the entire city is in District 10, which is one of the districts that I represent. Those are the folks that I care about, and those are the people that I think about. And when I'm thinking about the impact that that budget shortages have had on them, as far as the fact that there's no, the fact that the CFE money, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity money that we're supposed to get to be able to build the schools, to be able to deal with our overcrowding, we have not been able to get it. The fact that when it comes to rate hikes in transportation funding, 95% of the people that live in my district go to work using the train, so they have to take it every single day. And when they're impacted every single day again by these not tax hikes, apologies, but by the rate hikes in transportation that they have to, because they have to get on the train, those are the folks that I'm thinking about. And I do agree with you that not only locally but nationally, Democrats have to just stand up and say, these are things that we believe in, these are things that I believe that the state needs to do, and that we're willing to take a stand and say, this is what we're going to do about as far as policy. And again, I don't think any of this stuff is going to be easy. And I'm not and there is no one senator or one assembly member or even one governor that can go to Albany, regardless of what their policy prescriptions are or their policy preferences are, and say everything changes immediately. And certainly we have not been going in a direction that has been more progressive, which is the reason, by the way, that I think we needed to take the Democratic conference into the majority in the first place. But I know that I'm very clear what my job is up there. It is to get consent to be able to reach better solutions, but I'm going to do it with a clear vision of what I believe the state should do and government should do for the people, again, that I serve, which is, again, the majority of the people. We're not talking about the 1% or the 2% that are making millions of dollars. I'm talking about the majority of the folks. So,
Let me just add that, not only Warren Buffett said this, but Mike Bloomberg passed an income tax surcharge. He pushed for an income tax surcharge in 2002 or 2003, shortly after he came in as mayor. He said at that time, I think he knows only rich people, by the way, and he said rich people won't leave the state. They won't leave the state just because we have imposed a surcharge. Now, he's changed his tune. I mean, now he sounds more and more like a Republican on tax policy, but when he increased the property tax, the highest that's ever been increased, an 18% increase, at this very same time, he imposed a surcharge with the support of the state legislature. Republicans in the state legislature authorized the city to increase and impose a surcharge, and he didn't think rich people would leave, and you know what? They didn't.
But it's also the case that as President Bush came into office with the surpluses of the Clinton years, which were fueled by a combination of cuts and tax increases, and I think it's fairly inarguable that the tax cuts had a huge impact on driving the deficit to its kind of astronomical levels that it is now. Those holes and those budget cuts at the federal level pushed down to the state. Those budget cuts at the state level pushed down to Senator-elect Rivera's district. So, I mean, these are real people with real lives, with real needs, and there is a social compact, especially in this state. This state, which is more progressive, more liberal, has a deeper belief in public services than the Arizonas and the Floridas of the world.
Well, Bloomberg has changed his tone, and he certainly has, because the world has changed. Wall Street as a share of the city's economy quadrupled from the 1980s until 2006. The city has had everything, guns and butter, enormous police department that is paid very well to help lower crime, and enormous social services spending on everything from Medicaid to public employee salaries, benefits, and so forth. We did not have to sacrifice anything or really ask any questions from the middle of the Koch era until 3 years ago. And the mayor sees Wall Street is not going to keep growing the way that it did. If it were to do so, it would eventually consume the entire economy, and that's simply not possible. So the mayor knows revenues have to come down and spending has to come down as well. The trajectory we would be on otherwise would mean eventually wealthy people would be paying 10%, 15%, 17%, 20%. At some point, you're losing much, much more money than you're gaining with each additional tax hike. And when you have tax hikes on the wealthy, you've got tax hikes on the middle class and the working class eventually too, because the wealthy tax hikes cannot cover the entire deficit that comes from spending increases every single year. That's why when the mayor did income tax surcharge, we also saw the property tax hikes that hit middle class people and the sales tax hikes that hit poorer people. So it's certainly fair to have a discussion about taxes. I wouldn't say tax rates are perfect the way they are. You're absolutely right that when Reagan was cutting taxes, marginal rate federally was much, much higher than it was today, 70% to 50%, then down to 28%. Big discussion. It's a little bit of a distraction for Republicans and Democrats to be kind of bickering over 39.6% or 36% at the federal level. Not as big a difference, but at the state level, the real serious discussion.
Well, it's a huge difference in income to the government. It's a huge.
Well, but
huge
it's not as much.
revenue.
It's not a place to be bogged down in hours worth of philosophical discussion. It's not the same as 50 to 90% as it was. The real discussion at the state level is a spending question, and that's where getting into working class constituencies, people paying higher fares and having less bus service. Is it fair to ask token booth clerks with $57,000 salary, another 25 or more in benefits, is it fair to ask them to take a 3-year wage freeze so that you don't have these service cuts? When you've got the union workers, when you include salary benefits, it goes above 6 figures according to the MTA's data. Is it fair to ask them to take a wage freeze, which they did not do in the Spitzer-Patterson era? They got 11.3% raises over 3 years. This doesn't come out of wealthy people's pockets. It comes out of the ridership's pockets. And this is where real discussion is. It's between public sector workers who are unionized and have tremendous power over the public sector and working class people who end up paying this bill. It's not the wealthy that end up paying it proportionate to the damage it does to people's lives.
Maybe the real discussion is what's the formula. It seems to me that it's not a question of whether you tax the rich and no one else pays or shares in it. And that's where, again, I think the conversation, instead of being a polarized discussion, has to be one in which we're focusing on, as the senator is, on how do we solve the problem. And if that means that, okay, the rich have to pay a certain increase in share, then there has to be a wage freeze for a certain period of time. I mean, it could be a combination of things that help get people out of, help get the state and the nation out of a certain predicament. And as then the economy grows, because it seems to me the way in which we really drive this thing is really through revenue. It's through a robust, vibrant economy is one of the fastest ways, you know, to move the thing forward. Now, the gap is so deep now, given the policies that drove us in the ditch, it's going to be very, very difficult for the revenue side to do it alone. But it seems to me it's not either or, but the question is fairness. How do you get a fair solution? Because the other sort of factor here is income inequality. That over this period of time, the last 25, 30 years, income inequality has become extraordinarily obscene, where the rich have gotten extraordinarily rich while middle-class people have stagnated, poor people have gotten much poorer. That's not fair. And so the conversation has got to revolve around what is the appropriate formula and asking people collectively to sacrifice so we move forward. And I think people would be willing to sacrifice if they thought it was fair. But if it's unfair, we'll continue to have an acrimonious discussion.
And nowhere is income inequality worse than in New York. We have, you know, on the subway line going from the east side up to Harlem, you have, there's like 4 stops or 6 stops in between the poorest census tract in the United States and the richest census tract. It's right on one subway line. You go just a few rides up and the whole world changes. So we have the worst income inequality. I think, you know, if you want to do some of the things that Nicole is talking about in dealing with sometimes an intractable special interest groups that are very difficult to deal with, including the teachers union and others, you can't deal with that if you adopt your tax position. I don't think if you adopt your tax position, you can expect that the entire budget, these gaps are going to be closed purely on the backs of working people. And rich people are going to say, well, we can't tax you because you might leave the state. To me, you got to combine these two things and say if workers and working people are going to make sacrifices, they're not going to make those sacrifices if the rich people who caused this meltdown are making none. They're not going to take it. Their unions aren't going to take it. Nobody's going to take it.
Nor should they.
Well, that's a political reality. You know, economics and politics are related, but they're different. So when you looked at the national election and you looked at a lot of working people voting Republican, what's that about?
Well, I think it's about the Democrats. It's about the progressives not defining. I mean, it's utterly mystifying to me that we no longer really know what it means to be a Democrat or a progressive. Because, I mean, it's pretty clear. The Tea Party was pretty clear. I mean, over and over again, they talked about limited government. You know, they talked about cutting the deficit and reducing it. So you had these 3 points. The Democrats, it's unclear who we are anymore. What is the progressive? What does it mean? When I was growing up, you knew essentially that, you know, the Republican Party was a party that tended to favor the rich, though that was not entirely true because you had the Javitzes and the Keatings and so forth who were quite good on social issues like civil rights and all that. And the Democrats were for working people and the poor. Today, Democrats run away from the very things that help make many of the people who are benefiting from Social Security, Medicare, unionization. I mean, that's not in the discussion. So
but there is a sense. I've always had a sense that in 2008 that the revulsion at the Bush years was such that they threw the bums out, but that the country remains somewhat of a center-right country, and that what happened this year is that in 2010 it kind of returned to normal. So many of the Democrats who lost were people who had just won in 2006 or 2008. And they weren't as if they were entrenched people. That, you know, it almost went back to the way it was before you had this revulsion.
Yeah, there were many of those districts that were the so-called Blue Dogs districts. They were more conservatives. But there was a time in this country when those districts were not Republican districts. They were Democratic districts. And, of course, the Civil Rights Revolution had something to do with them flipping. When Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1965, he said, we just lost the South. And, of course, Nixon, the Southern strategy, all those things have played into it. I continue to argue that the Democratic Party and the progressives have to articulate a legacy of achievement that has improved the quality of life for working families, for poor people, and for the middle class.
And you believe that that may require a third party, a third force, along the lines of the Working Families Party on a national level?
I absolutely do, because I think there has to be pressure on the Democrats as well as the Republicans. And I think whereas on the right you have the Tea Party sort of conditioning and constraining, conditioning the message of the Republicans, so much so that Mitch McConnell, who seems to like earmarks, suddenly gave them up because he's got to now deal with his right flank, which is the Tea Party. We don't have an equivalent, on the left that's organized. And
I want to go to a question, but you're not concerned that the degree to which the right flank pulls the Republicans this way and a left flank pulls the Democrats this way, that's not a recipe for increased polarization and less of an ability to find a common ground?
Well, I think you can find common ground. I'm a pragmatic progressive, but I think you state your case first. I think you put your best foot forward. You don't start with health care with a Romney-style Massachusetts compromise that he's now running away from, instead of starting with single payer. You start with single payer, you give the rationale for it, and maybe you get a public option. But if you start with a compromise, you get a compromise. And you disappoint a whole lot of people who really think that you just delivered 30 million people to the insurance companies.
Let me give us your name and your campus, please.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Sue. I'm from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Senator-elect Rivera, with the rising shortfalls in Albany and the severe cuts that are now being faced by CUNY and SUNY students to the tuition assistance program, do you feel that because of all of these cuts, that these students are going to be priced out of our state's public institutions due to the lack of funding from Albany and the lack of aid coming to students?
I think that it's one of the issues that we have to deal with. I'm originally born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I came to New York to study at the CUNY Graduate Center, where we are right now. It was in 42nd Street then, but then we moved down here. And I taught, I've been teaching for 11 years, but the first 3 years I taught at Hunter College. I'm committed to public higher education. And I believe that it's one of the issues that we have to deal with when we're up there. And the conversation that we had a little bit earlier about the steps that we need to take when we're dealing with these big budget gaps, as far as figuring out what the revenue stream is, then figuring out how to make government more efficient, and only then talking about cuts. This is included there, because when we're talking about the people that I work for, who are my constituents, who are folks like yourself, and some of you might even live in my district, who cannot afford a private education and have access to high quality public education right now in the CUNY system and the SUNY system. I would want to make sure that you can continue to receive that. So it's right now I can't tell you exactly how we're going to do it, because as I said, it has to be done along with my colleagues and the governor, but it is absolutely something that is not in the back of my head, it's in front of my head.
Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Dafshire, and I'm from Brooklyn College. I just want to go back to the whole point with tax raises. We're throwing around a number of 40,000. I also want to bring into the factor that I never hear a discussion of the amount of children that are in a household, household expenses, cost of living. For example, in New York, cost of living in New York is extremely high, like California, like other metro areas like Boston. And I just want to know where they come into play if we're going to be raising taxes for people that are $40,000 median income. So let's say that's supposed middle class in New York, 50,000. What if they have 4 or 5 kids in the household? Then we're going to have to, I would assume, raise expenditures when it comes to, children care, when it comes to, welfare, things like that, just to keep their family running. I mean, a lot of families are just barely making it on $30,000, $40,000 a year. They have mortgages, they're losing their homes. I mean, I just want to know where the children come into play, where these family dynamics come into play, and then people don't talk about that. They always talk about, oh, let's just tax them.
Anybody want to jump? You also have the situation where in the proposals to balance the federal budget, or some of the proposals coming out of the various commissions that are studying it, to even cut down on certain taxes that benefit middle class people, including the mortgage deduction tax, which would be part of a package of tax reform. So there would be something to offset it. I'm not the expert on this. I don't know if you've looked at any of these questions.
Yeah, that is a good idea. Simplifying the tax code, getting rid of mortgage credits, oil and gas credits, whatever is your special thing that you're doing to get your tax credit, get rid of it. Have a simple, progressive tax code where the wealthy pay more, as they do already. Right now, nearly half of tax filers don't pay any taxes. Many of them get money back from the negative income tax, the earned income tax credit, which is good. You want to be helping working class people out through the tax code. We do that. In some ways, the progressive argument has won. It's become mainstream. You have conservatives from Milton Friedman to some of my colleagues writing about this and saying you want a progressive, simple tax code. Things like mortgage tax deduction, college tax credits, and so forth, all these things do is raise the price of whatever it is that you're buying. Mortgage tax credit, all it did was push up the cost of housing. You've got to jump through these government hoops in order to get a little bit of money that the government wants to give you as a gift. You have kids on your own schedule, you buy a house on your own schedule, you save for retirement on your own schedule, and you should pay the same fair tax rate that other people in your income group are making. So that's a perfectly valid discussion.
Well, the truth is that I don't know what Nicole supports, but the Republicans only support simplifying the tax code if they get to lower the rates on the rich. It's got a trade-in. They say, okay, we'll get rid of some of the special goodies we get now if you lower the rates. If you don't lower the rates, they're not in favor of getting rid of it.
But there is an argument that if you take away a lot of those deductions, because obviously every deduction means somebody else has to fill that gap.
Let's go back to the young lady's
so you might
question
be able
about
to,
children.
Yes.
I mean, look, I think she may have misunderstood and you may have misunderstood as an audience here what I'm talking about in terms of the $40,000. I'm not talking about that this will result in increased taxes on people making $40,000. I'm saying that if we go back to the period before 2009 when the tax rates were increased on the rich, at that time, everybody who had an income who made $40,000 or more was in the same tax bracket. In other words, they paid the same percentage of their income in taxes. And we are going to go back to that unless this tax hike is extended. We're going to go back to a system where somebody making $20 million is going to be in the same tax bracket, meaning they pay the same percentage of their income in taxes as somebody making $40,000. I certainly wasn't talking about that anybody's contemplating taxing people additionally who make $40,000 regardless of how many children they have.
But in fact, at a federal level, if the Bush tax cuts, which are scheduled, do in fact sunset, as they are scheduled to do, that person making $40,000 or $20 million, they will all get tax increases. It will return to the pre-Bush tax cut levels. And what the president is talking about is extending them for everybody under a particular income level so that the only people who would be paying more money would in fact be those who presumably could afford it the most. Perhaps they would then move to the Bahamas or Bermuda.
But it would also, by the way, reduce the deficit, if I understand correctly. That would also drive the deficit down.
Well, yes, it would drive. I mean, any revenue obviously drives the deficit.
Well, I'm just saying,
down.
but that's what the Republicans, on the one hand, they're saying we want to cut the deficit, except when it comes to this instance of extending the Bush tax, which were never paid for in the first place. Which is another thing that doesn't get, now that people are tuning in, because this is the most fascinating thing. For years and years and years, you could get nobody to pay attention to the issue of the deficit. So now that people are paying attention to it, then the initial Bush tax cuts were never ever paid for in the first place. Am I wrong about that?
It's great that they're talking about extending tax cuts, and I'm just think it's fantastic to talk about extending tax cuts because that will increase economic activity and make for more wealth for everybody because that works so well over the last 10 years. So I really think.
I think he's being facetious.
Bob, just to try to put, because we've been talking a lot about taxes, and tax policy is really the core policy. I think we have to put it in a broader perspective here because we've been so focused on taxes. Well, it's like one issue, but no. This is the core dividing issue that has, as Ron said, historically separated Democrats from Republicans. If there's one issue that you could look at and say, so if Barack Obama and the Democrats in the Congress go along with extending the Bush tax cuts, then Ron's point is absolutely correct. How can you tell the difference between these guys? It's so fundamental at a state level, and it's so fundamental at a federal level. that this is the way in which we distinguish one party from the other. This is the core value.
You wanna?
Well, you made a joke, but it's a serious joke
Oh, I
because it points out. No, it's very funny. But talking about will people move to Bermuda?
Right.
You know, people realize
People
that
do move their money offshore, right?
it is much easier, and this points up the confusion of talking about the issue at the national level and the state issue. A lot of similarities, but a lot of differences as well. It is documentedly easier to move from New York to Florida. You don't have to learn a new language, new culture. Fewer people will move from here abroad if federal tax rates go up. You know, that's just a fact. But what happens on the state level, I think, is more important. If you raise the tax rate, that may capture 25, 30% of extra spending. Mathematically, it cannot capture any more than that. The tax rate becomes prohibitively high, well into the double digits. It is middle class and working class people who bear the rest of the burden of higher spending. And that's why the debate at state level is not a tax debate. It's a spending debate. And you talk about different types of people needing to make different sacrifices at different levels. We saw the income tax surcharges on the higher earners. That didn't fix anything. All it did was stretch out the problem another 3 years, add on another 3 years worth of unsustainable state and local spending. We spend more per child than any other state but one, you know, $17,000 a year, not because of the children, because the teacher salaries are up 42% under Mayor Bloomberg. We spend more on subway fares, not because we're getting better service, but because we've got entitled class of employees who can expect above inflation
No, because
raises.
the state has
every year.
not, because the state takes the money that is supposed to be allocated specifically for transportation, and then they jack that and they
And
put it
why
into
do
the
they do
general
that? Because
fund.
they need the money because spending is too high in the rest of the general fund.
Let me try to get a couple of more questions. We have about 10 minutes left.
My name is Igor Maruchenkov, and I'm from Brooklyn College. Whether one is a Democrat or Republican, there is, I think, a vivid realization of the need to improve economy, with emphasis being certainly placed on long-term goals over short-term goals. And New York State Democrats' unwillingness to cut taxes is, I think, a bold proof of this statement. And any political science student knows that the only, perhaps, almost fail-safe method for long-term economic improvement is investing into education. Are our legislators unaware of this correlation between investment into education and long-term economic improvement? Because education budget has been under assault constantly. And I would very respectfully ask not to obstruct the issue by appealing to complexities of the legislative process and balancing the budget, because this is...
You're going to have to deal with this question.
I'm going to have to deal with it. I'm going to have to deal with this question, and I'm going to have to deal with when I'm going to have to refer to the legislative process. I am very much. I absolutely recognize the value of education. I would not. My parents, both of my parents, are the first in their families to graduate from high school and college, and in my extended family, there's very few people who had any type of higher education degree. And I've been immensely privileged to have been able to travel to New York, to be able to have the opportunities that I have, and they've all been because of education. The work that I do in public service is to make sure that other people have the same access. So I am absolutely aware of the impact that cuts in public education or higher education funding have in the overall quality of life for people in the long term. But with that awareness in my head, I go to Albany to actually fight the battles that I'm going to have to fight up there. It's not having even been sworn in yet.
We still think that you're responsible.
and I accept that responsibility and I embrace it, and I hope that I'm kept accountable.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kaufman. I'm from the College of Staten Island. I want to ask a question to Senator Rivera. Why does the inequality exist between the public money that supports senior and community colleges and CUNY, and shouldn't that money be equal to everybody?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You're saying that there's a difference in the money that goes to where and to where?
Yeah, and like, for instance, my college, the College of Staten Island, doesn't get as much money as, say, Hunter or higher.
Is that the difference between 4-year colleges and 2-year colleges?
My college is also a 4-year.
The 4-year college? I do not know. I do not know.
And in fact, on a state level, they're trying to kind of break up the system a little bit in the SUNY system and allow individual colleges to charge variable tuition as opposed to having it as a system-wide oversight. So that's a.
But I'll say this: I am not,
Right.
and I'll be honest with you. I do not know. I am not sure the determining factor in.
That's a very interesting question.
In putting together how much money goes to each one of these 4-year colleges or 2-year colleges. Probably has to do with the population of students, the type of programs that are there, the type of maintenance that's necessary in the schools. But
it's true in every public school as well. It varies because it's determined by the salaries of the people who work there. That, you know, the allocation. It's not a matter of an allocation where if you have more expensive professors at Hunter, there's going to be a higher per capita cost to go to Hunter. I mean, there will also be a higher tuition maybe, but I'm talking about that the state aid will be higher because it has to pay the salaries of professors who are paid more than professors at the College of Staten Island. And that's related to their experience, to the number of years they've been in the system, all kinds of things.
The state system, though, is involved in a very intense debate. There's significant support and significant opposition to allowing the various colleges to charge varying tuition, and it's setting off arguments about a caste system within the system. It's a very complicated debate that I know about and don't pretend to understand at all. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Jana Fuzalova, and I'm from Queens College. And my question is kind of a follow-up on a comment that Professor Daniels had that stated that Democrats, especially liberal Democrats, fail to define what it means to be a Democrat. And my question is, why is there inconsistency within a party to serve the same ideology and have the same priorities today as opposed to in the past? And what effect does that have on the electorate, since parties are supposed to serve as a voting queue for the voters?
Very good question.
Well, I guess in order to clarify it, there was this sort of a broad sense of a Democratic Party that was on the side of working people and poor people. There were also divergences. Those divergences have always been there. There have always been conservative Democrats and liberals and moderates and so forth. What I find in this particular period, and this is a discussion that's going on internal to the Democratic Party now, is between the so-called blue dogs and the progressive.
Except that there aren't very many blue dogs left because they got
wiped out.
Right,
they got wiped out. But I guess in the general sense, what I'm saying is that there was a broad consensus. You know, I would suspect that the vast majority of Democrats voted for things like Social Security, Medicare, those kinds of programs that were beneficial to poor and working people. The other thing I have to say, however, was that we also were in a period in the era of Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy and others, where you actually could reach across the aisle and find some counterparts. So in a way, it's not just Democrat and Republican, it's also Republican, it's ideological. It's conservative versus liberal, because you could find a few Republican liberals and a few Republican moderates, which have now, that's like an endangered species now. What the Tea Party people have done and others has sort of purified the Republican Party, so it's now become the conservative party.
But isn't that precisely what you're talking about with a working families party kind of organization?
No, it is not.
No, that's not. I don't want to. I would not be willing to go that far, simply because I'm one of the few who say I would rather have those blue dogs working as a part of a Democratic majority in the House, rather than to say that we want to get rid of them. Because I think on a number of questions, 7 out of 10 questions, those blue dog Democrats are going to be for the broader agenda. And until we can actually go into those states where those blue dogs are and create a more progressive climate, then it seems to me it's suicidal to get rid of them. And that's one of the things that the Tea Party paid a price for in some of the instances. It was too far to the right in some of its races, and therefore lost some opportunities, thank God, to actually capture the Senate perhaps and so forth. So I'm not for a purist kind of agenda. I'm for a broad definition that has people understand that the Democratic Party, by and large historically, has been on the side of poor and working people and has made significant contributions. And let me just make this final point. Because whatever people always talk about the center and going to the middle is defined by political movements. You know, I mean, George Wallace and others helped to push the content of public policy pronouncements and decisions to the right. It is also possible to push it to the left. So there's nothing about this center. The center is not a platonic thing that sort of sits here. It moves based on the nature of the tenor of the times and who organizes, who mobilizes in order to articulate a vision and message to the people such that they resonate to a particular position.
That's exactly right. I think that a lot of it, there's a lot of things that are floating around in my head, but I'll more specifically deal with this whole Tea Party versus WFP thing. The Tea Party and the Working Families Party, absolutely not the same thing. First of all, in the case of the Tea Party, it is not a Tea Party. It's not a party in itself. It's not organized in that way in any way, shape, and form. It is more of a quote-unquote movement, and it is grass tops fed. So we're talking about something. It is not something that is in numbers such a large number of people. What we're talking about is that there is a funding stream that comes from conservative ideologues that actually want to push and pull the Republicans to the right. And as a parenthesis to that, I think the Republicans are in trouble because the type of policy that these basic Tea Partiers want is not going to be possible. The type of things that they want as far as taxation policy, as far as immigration policy.
My favorite is when they said, keep the government's hands off my Social Security.
Exactly.
Right.
It's not going to prove possible as far as policy prescriptions in reality. And the Working Families Party is a completely different entity that has grown in New York and has spread to other places, and it is progressive in nature. It organizes itself within the different states.
I still think I'm about to get the goodbye side. You know, my concern is always that the degree to which the Working Families Party pulls the Democratic Party to the left, and you see the Tea Party pulling the Republican Party to the right. I happen to believe that at some point you have to meet in the middle. It has to be.
Yeah, but it's not the same thing. It is not the same thing. When you have
the question is, where's the middle?
Well, I've just got the goodbye sign, and I always make deadline. And I want to thank everybody, and we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.